It could soon end up costing you more to head downtown or go to the grocery store in Chicago. That's part of a new budget plan that includes increased property taxes.
City budget negotiations continue. Mayor Johnson is offering up more tax revenue suggestions.
Brandon Johnson has put forth a new set of ideas to get his budget passed. This comes after his previous proposal was rejected by City Council. Today, the Johnson administration proposing a $68 million property tax increase. That's down from the $300 million he originally proposed in October.
Hey, Joe Marie, the Johnson administration started at $300 million in property taxes, then lowered it to $150. Now it's at $68 million. But that's not all of the changes we're learning about. Not even close.
The city of Chicago now trying to balance part of the budget by installing more speed cameras.
We have found millions of dollars of efficiencies across the board.
Mayor Brandon Johnson does not disappoint. He went from $300 million in a property tax ask to $150 million. Now he's down to $60 million. But he's still going to destroy Chicago. He's not going to do it with property taxes. He's going to do it with fees. And there are no shortage of ideas of fees that this mayor is trying to use to get the money out of your pockets to cover up his reckless spending.
Now, new to the discussions here is an increase on the tax you pay for plastic bags at the grocery store. Instead of paying 7 cents per bag, you'd pay now 10 cents. Johnson also elaborated on how much revenue would be generated from other taxes he's previously discussed increasing, like the streaming and cable TV tax and the taxes you pay when you take an Uber or Lyft or even park in a city garage.
You're going to want to hang out to the end of this video because that's when I'm going to put forward some very straightforward solutions that you haven't heard conversed about anywhere else. But let's go through a couple of his ideas. Obviously, we've got the $68 million property tax increase. So everyone in Chicago should be saying, well, thank God he came down from 300 to 150 to $68 million. So that should be a win for everyone. But all he's going to do is just try to nickel and dime you in other places. So let's look at this tax that he wants to put on plastic bags at the grocery store. Whether you're an individual who goes into the grocery store and has your groceries bagged for you, or you're one of those self-checkout people, they're paying 7 cents per bag right now. He wants to raise that to 10 cents. That doesn't sound like a lot of money, when you just think about it. It's only 3 cents of an increase, right? You only have to look at a store like Walmart. They use billions of bags every year. And that's how they're trying to come up with this additional revenue. They say, hey, billions of bags. There are 4 Walmarts. That doesn't include the Albertsons, the Jewels, the Marianos, the Trader Joe's, all of these other grocery stores, not to mention the little mom and pop stores. So if they raise that actual tax from 7 cents to 10 cents, they're hoping that you won't notice because you'll only be paying 3 cents at a time. So it won't be as big of a shock. But all they've done is they're just playing a shell game. They were asking for the money in the form of property taxes that you were going to pay in a lump sum because in Cook County and in Chicago, you pay your property taxes twice a year in March and then again in September. So now instead of you paying a large chunk twice a year, they're just going to nickel and dime you, or in this case, 3 cents you to death because everybody has to go to the grocery store. Let's look at this other one that he's talking about. He also was talking about taxing the streaming and cable TV tax increase. So now, if you have a Netflix account, if you have a Hulu account, Paramount, if you have cable television, they're going to sneak another tax into that. You are going to have to pay a tax on your Netflix bill just because you live in the city of Chicago. Think about that for a moment. You are going to have to pay an additional fee as a privilege of having a streaming service because you live in the city of Chicago. That's how this mayor, again, is just going to try and nickel and dime you little by little. Let's look, the congestion surcharge. So right now, Monday through Friday, if you take an Uber into the city of Chicago, there's an additional tax, and that's that congestion surcharge. They've tried it in a couple of other cities. I know they tried to do it in New York City. So they want you to pay an additional fee. Now they want to extend that fee to 7 days a week. So now you're going to have to pay this fee every time you get into an Uber, you're going to have to pay a little bit more. Why? Because this mayor is trying to cover up for how he has mismanaged this budget. And let's look at that last one, the parking tax rate hike. I already know, I go into the city at least once a week on Fridays when I do my terrestrial radio show, and I pay about $17 to park in the underground parking garage for 3 hours. Now they want to put an additional tax even on that. That's going to be, if you're in a garage, I'm sure it's going to be for the meters. Again, just nickel and diming the people of the city of Chicago. And we can't forget about this new tax that he wants to do, or let's just call it a fee, because he's got to come up with an additional $11 to $12 million for the consent decree to cover the police officers. That's that consent decree he has with the federal government for civil rights violations in the past. So what does he do? He wants to introduce more speed light cameras so that you can pay additional fines.
The city of Chicago now trying to balance part of the budget by installing more speed cameras throughout the city. It's one of the several ideas he pitched to city council on Friday in an effort to come to a compromise by the end of the year on the budget. The Tribune says that one cost the city is obligated to cover is $11.5 million to restore 162 CPD vacancies. That is to comply with the federal consent decree. The mayor says adding $2.5 million worth of cameras could cover that cost. The city has more than 100 speed cameras right now.
And here's the greater thing that we need to consider while we're talking about this. He's lowering the quality of life for the people in the city of Chicago by just nickel and diming them. Just every little thing you do, you've got to pay an additional fee or you've got to pay an additional fine. That's the same thing as raising your property taxes. Like I said earlier, this is just a shell game.
The people of Chicago say a lot of things to me, but they never say, Mayor Johnson, could you just cut these services? Mayor Johnson, can you just lay off more people?
15 of the more conservative council members say the city's budget has expanded dramatically since the pandemic, and there needs to be a fiscal reset.
Our starting point is let's look at 2020's budget, adjust that for inflation. And that should be the starting point on a mayor's spending plan.
Those same council members sent a letter to the mayor saying that could reduce spending by $568 million, helping to avoid a property tax hike. The same group of alders calling for cuts also commissioned a poll showing the mayor's approval rating was at 15%. The poll also found 81% of respondents preferred some cuts in services versus raising property taxes by $150 million.
So you heard it right there. Brandon Johnson is saying, hey, I'm not going to fire anyone. I'm not going to do any layoffs. And he said, the people of Chicago never come to me and ask me, when am I going to lay people off? When am I going to cut services? But these 15 conservative alders from the city of Chicago, they went out and paid for a poll, and 81% of Chicago residents said they prefer cuts and they prefer layoffs before they would actually accept a property tax increase. The people of Chicago are telling this mayor what they want, and he's still not listening. I don't know how anyone is not getting this. So these are the solutions that I propose, and let's just take a quick moment and look at these. These are really straightforward and really very simple. Two of the biggest expenditures for the city of Chicago are payroll and buildings. This city owns a huge portfolio of buildings and vacant land. But let's start at the actual salary end of the conversation. This mayor is saying he's not going to lay anyone off. So if you look at, just go to the City of Chicago website, and you're not going to hear this analysis anywhere else. The City of Chicago website says that the City of Chicago employs approximately 40,000 people. And of those 40,000 employees of the city of Chicago, the average salary is right around $50,000. So just pull out your calculator, multiply 40,000 times 50,000, you get $2 billion. So you're going to sit here and tell me, you're going to sit here and tell the city of Chicago, all the residents, Brandon Johnson, you're going to tell the country that out of 40,000 people, there's nobody who's underperforming. Not one IT person, not one janitor, not one accountant, not one office worker. There's nobody out of that 40,000 people who are on a final written warning. Those of you who work in the private sector like I do, when I say final written warning, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're saying that none of the 40,000 employees of the city of Chicago are underperforming, so you can't let go of anyone. If he just let go of just 10%, just 10% of the 40,000 employees of the city of Chicago, that would be a savings of $200 million. Just 10%. I'm not saying fire everybody who works for the city of Chicago, but you can't tell me that you can't find one single solitary employee of the city of Chicago who is an individual whom you cannot identify and say, this person is underperforming, we're going to have to let you go, not only for the good of the city, but because you're not doing your job well. The second thing on this list, the city of Chicago owns a ton of real estate and vacant land across the city of Chicago. Whether that's office buildings, whether it's buildings that houses the CPD, the police department, the fire department, whether it's just regular office space, whether it's just vacant land that they own across the city of Chicago. Here's an idea. Let's start consolidating these publicly owned buildings for the purposes of efficiency. If you have two police departments that are within, I don't know, a quarter of a mile of one another, consolidate those buildings and put all of those individuals into one facility. Same thing for office people, same thing for libraries, same thing for schools, because every building that the city of Chicago owns, they've got to pay a NICOR bill for the heat. They've got to pay an electric bill to keep the lights on. They've got to pay a water bill. They've got to pay janitors to actually clean those facilities. These are efficiencies that the city should be looking for before they ask the citizens to pay more money out of their pockets, either in the form of property taxes or increased fees and fines. That is what the responsible thing would be to do for this executive, to say, I am going to exhaust every single option to reduce expenses before I go to the city, to the citizens of the city of Chicago, and ask them to pay more money to bring in more revenue. But this mayor is ideologically tightly locked to the idea that he cannot lay anyone off, unless, of course, that's a policeman, because we already know that he is beholden to the far left view of abolishing or defunding the police. I have that in another video that I'll link to the end of this one so you can go back and see this. This man does not know what he's doing. You could not run your household budget by saying, I'm continuing to spend money, I'm continuing to spend more money, so I've got to raise more money. At some point, you're going to sit down at your kitchen table, you're going to look at your bills, you're going to look at how much you're spending, your expenses, how much your revenue is, and at some point, you're going to max out on the amount of revenue that you're bringing in, and you're going to have to make a decision. I've got to cut some expenses somewhere. I've got to turn off this streaming service. I've got to get rid of this cable bill. All of us have to make decisions about how much money we're spending versus how much money we make. But this mayor has decided that he is going to continue to keep all of the expenses the same. The only thing he has to do is generate more revenue. And I'm saying that is the wrong approach. He needs to address the spending end of this equation, like all of the alders have told him, like all of the citizens of the city of Chicago have told him. Cut the spending. I didn't even bring up the $600 million that he spent on the migrants. I didn't even bring that up. But he spent $600 million on migrants. Meanwhile, the actual salaries that are being paid by the city of Chicago are over $2 billion. You have got to find some way to bring those numbers down so you don't ask people who already can't afford it to pay more. If you're still hanging out, I really, really appreciate it. This particular story and stories like this that are going on all around this country, they frustrate me, and I'm sure they frustrate you. We are tired of seeing individuals who continue to make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and they are not held accountable for the bad decisions they make. The only accountability that Mayor Brandon Johnson has is that he might not get reelected. But if he's not reelected, and he won't be, if he's not going to be reelected, the people, the citizens of the city of Chicago are going to be left holding the bag. And now harder decisions are going to have to be made in the future because he didn't make the hard decisions right now. Do me a favor and stop what you're doing just for a second. Hit that subscribe button. We are celebrating 1,000 subscribers that we hit in the last week, and it's because of people like you. According to YouTube, over 90% of you are returning to watch these videos, but you haven't subscribed. I promise you one thing. We are going to speak truth to power without fear or favor. So hit that subscribe button, join our community, join our tribe, and let's grow this community together where we hold people in power accountable. I really, really appreciate you hanging out and watching this video. There's a couple of places you can click right here so you can watch additional videos, and I'll catch you in the next one.